ARPGs are daunting for a new player, many with onboarding that feels entirely inaccessible to most people. Scouring YouTube isn't a big help either, as much of that content is aimed towards folks already experienced with the genre. How do I, a single dad with so many kids, and I live in a shoe, how do I know that Path of Exile 2 is worth my limited time? When putting my ear to the wall nets me a million conversations about aura stacking like I'm outside a Gold's gym, right? Well, that's what I hope to remedy with this video. I'm here to treat Path of Exile 2 like a regular old video game. Forget endgame, forget the second, third, or fourth league, forget all that shit. And let me tell you about Path of Exile 2.
Those who obsess with death, let them soon be acquainted with it.
So I'm going to go ahead and assume a base level of familiarity here and not patronize you by explaining the entire genre. That would be silly. For veterans that happen to stick around, you might find some perspective here from someone far removed from your culture and what you expect from these games. But I expect we'll align more than you think, especially by the end. For clarity's sake, I'll split this review up into two parts for the three acts I played. Act 1 and 2 in a bundle, and Act 3 on its own. They'll function as quasi-positive and negative rundowns, not by choice, I just think a few cracks started to present themselves throughout the third act. But we'll get into that. Now, maybe you've heard, through whatever kind of vine is native to your country, that there are 4 acts available in the current build of the game, and are naturally wondering why I only played 3. Well, I see a whole lot of potential here, and I want to preserve a large portion of the experience for that blessed day when the big 1.0 update finally comes around. And look man, I put over 30 hours into this puppy, you'll know enough to decide whether the game is for you by that point. And to reiterate, that's what this video might do for you, because that's a little ways past the refund window. That's the preamble. I'm not generally a fan of ARPGs, at least modern ones. They tend to rely on all that number-heavy background information to carry the experience, and I don't want every combat encounter to devolve into complete disregard for what's on screen, and instead become a muscle memory sequence of buffs, debuffs, and attacks that I know won't fail me because I've spent the last hour and a half planning the perfect distribution of ability stats and perks. I want to play the game. And as funny as it sounds, I'd like the freedom to have a kind of shitty build and pull through because moment to moment, I'm good at the game. Path of Exile 2 seeks to inject that more methodical gameplay back into ARPGs with the addition of pretty mandatory dodge rolling. I've heard many people call it Souls-light combat, and as polarizing as these labels can be, for a time it was pretty accurate, and I was a big fan. From minute 1, I could tell this game was a little more cognizant of how useful it is to fascinate a player with its world and aesthetic, accounting for even the class select screen. It isn't a traditional menu, there's a lineup of prisoners at the gallows, with one to match each of the options. The game doesn't have a character creator either, instead each class embodies a pre-made character with a voice of their own and a backstory to boot. I was initially skeptical of this approach, but the game is far more immersive than it seems from a distance, and having a closer connection to this world shot that skepticism down immediately. I chose Warrior, which was a mistake I don't think I'll make again. More on that later. And as this was a co-op playthrough with my girlfriend, she picked Huntress. There are 8 classes available at the moment, all with very different and very thoughtful playstyles. That dark, semi-low fantasy tidal wave that this game unleashes was a surprise, to be sure. It's wonderfully conceived. The UI strays away from stock standard modernity and embraces the over-designed but admittedly preferred style that we've lost in recent years. I mean, just look at that intricate detailing. It's everywhere. And even further, the mouse brings a shine to the UI as it hovers above it. This extends heartily to the rest of the aesthetic. While not top of the line in fidelity, from a pure design standpoint, it is in the upper echelon, and it isn't really fighting for its place among the best. Armor, weapons, characters, and enemies all embody this vision and beautifully slot right into this world. Musically, it's not the kind of soundtrack you'll run to Spotify for, but it's there, noticeably, and it does the job perfectly. Path of Exile 2's soundscape follows along with a clear penchant for the diversity in how it conveys the power of abilities and spells from both the player character and their enemies. It all sounds really fucking cool. And hey, I didn't have an issue with performance. I left resolution scaling on by accident and noticed better frames without any noticeable blur. That being said, I'm playing in 4K. I can definitely sympathize with those that struggle to run this one, and I do think it could be far better optimized given the great, but not great visuals, if you understand me. even though I didn't necessarily have any issues. A small break in this consistent praise is that there's a hefty bit of whiplash going between, well, everything else and the microtransaction store, as it's aptly named. For better or worse, I haven't decided which. It feels a little tacky. Everything is suddenly geared towards monetization. It looks like it was ripped straight from the Elder Scrolls Online. I know it'll be free to play eventually, I just can't help but feel like it could have been implemented a little more tastefully. I don't know. Thankfully, this inconsistent vision doesn't wander too far. Narratively, I was impressed. It didn't blow me away, but besides my warrior, whom I still enjoyed purely because he reminded me so much of Spartacus, down to the restrained Kiwi accent, but besides him, the voice acting being as solid as it is, sometimes even absolutely fantastic.
Don't do this. Stop. Just wait. Surely we can...
No escape. Not this time.
Great Wolf take you, bastard!
And some really interesting lore to delve into should you wish, truly helped the story become more than a reason for you to go kill a bunch of shit in a bunch of different places. I found myself caring about what certain characters had to say, and looking forward to continue playing my part in stopping the beast from corrupting all of Rayclast and beyond. Now, I know we're all here to hear about the gameplay itself, but I wanted to cover all bases, and I think this game deserved the attention in some lesser discussed areas. But you're right. How does it play? As I implied, pretty well for the most part. The dodge roll is a fantastic addition. There is far more reason to pay attention, and you have to, as enemies will chunk the shit out of your health bar. Your health circle. Sphere. Your health. If you're not careful. Path of Exile 2's bosses are thoughtfully designed, with mostly well-telegraphed attacks that kept me on my toes, and a ton of variety between them that did just the same. The smaller grunts and mini-bosses get a similar treatment. Look, I don't know who they have chained to a desk modeling every little creature and critter, but I pray for their soul. It is really something to have so many different enemies to keep it fresh. For most of Act 1, it'll feel far slower and more methodical than you'll expect. I found myself wading through bogs and the like, having trouble with small groups of enemies that I don't think I could actually see anymore underneath all the particle effects. The progression of each class seems feigned to be non-linear, and it kinda is, but I think there's an unsaid rule here, and it encourages players to stick to what their class does best until they're much further into the game. I tried to branch out early-ish and give my warrior a few AoE spells, and you can take skills from any class, but it ended up making me feel a little underpowered. That's something to keep in mind. The skill system, or more specifically the skill gem system, is a really cool one. You see, instead of a traditional unlock system or skill tree, though there still is one of those and a fucking ridiculously, stupidly large one at that, instead the character has skill gem slots, and each ability is cut into a skill gem before it's usable. As briefly mentioned, you can pull skill gems from any class and create your own Frankenstein's monster of a build, though I can't promise it'll work. Each skill gem itself has a few support gem slots. This offers even further customization to the ability itself. If nothing else, this system is a surefire way to make me feel like I'm tinkering with my own little invention, and it definitely helps give players ownership over their builds. The abilities themselves are out of this world cool. In sound design, function, everything. There's so much quality to bite into. When this system works, when its gears are greased, it bloody works. So far, the game's drawing feature alongside the dodge roll. On reaching Act 2, it'll start to get a little faster. Abilities and spells get bigger and more powerful with more distracting, but nice to look at particle effects. My build began to fall into line a little more, opening up exciting possibilities, but the quality of everything else I've discussed remained, even if some of that methodical gameplay started to falter. I found some class synergy with the Huntress, if only a little bit. I could crack the earth beneath and reveal magma-filled fissures that I could then slam to throw hot lava and fire everywhere. But it worked when she used any ability that slammed the ground too. I had built into stun with an ability that sent a shockwave through any enemy primed for it. I'd also dipped into breaking the armor of my enemies, mostly bosses, which helped both of us deal more damage. I think at this point, things were looking really good. I found a little disappointment as I realized build creativity was probably limited to much later game characters, but my higher level stuff was cooler than those shitty little spells anyway, so I was pretty Gucci. And though I haven't mentioned it, we'd been finding some sexy loot along the way, few and far between, but we did find it. Oh, and difficulty wise, we'd only really had trouble with the final boss of each respective act, which was a nice sweet spot, even if I'm partial to harder games, and mana doesn't do anything until a little later, so don't worry about it so much. There were interesting little side adventures to sink our teeth into, lots of great developments in the story, interesting conversations, and so on, I think it's safe to say that we were loving it. And regardless of where this little review might go, that still counts for a lot. This was 20 to 25 hours of me and my girlfriend thoroughly engaged in a genre we'd tried and failed to get stuck into before. That is an achievement, believe me. But then Act 3 came along and, well, let me do the cool transition thing first. Act 3 is where Grinding Gear Games forgets why it made Path of Exile 2. At least in my opinion. It was almost like a mirrored world, within which they never opted for a more methodical playstyle and instead chose to continue the stigma they tried to escape, that ARPGs are thoughtless in their moment-to-moment gameplay and only for people who enjoy sinking hours upon hours into trading and meticulous build crafting, that what's on the screen is just a vessel for the numbers. The game sped up, but we didn't. In fact, I implied a whole lot of regret for picking Warrior as my class and, well, I slowed down, and I pretty rapidly fell behind. Enemies got tougher and more numerous, faster. If I died, I didn't necessarily make a mistake. I got swarmed and couldn't move, or I didn't see something I would have if not for the massive colors my screen had become. Sometimes I neglected to use certain abilities because they'd make it too hard to react to anything. And sometimes I neglected to use them because I realized that leaning into one or two was smarter than, silly me, having fun. I'm mostly as stubborn as they come, so I kept doing the worst thing because it was more fun, but I missed the game that made optimization an option, something you could outrun with dexterity. Valuable loot became more than few and far between. I found myself wielding weapons and wearing armor from Act 2 long into Act 3. I thought rare tier items always dropped from elite enemies, and that was the case for a long time until it wasn't. When the reward for exploration isn't sufficient, exploration becomes a slog. But it's heaping salt in the wound for the maps to get bigger alongside all of this. Not only did I enjoy, well, everything else less, I had to do it all for longer. There was no respite from these wickedly large maps with labyrinthian layouts. It was chore after chore after chore. Salt was in the wound, now pepper, maybe a little oregano, a garnish of basil. All they had to do now was lay that sauce on thick, and they did. But not in a good way. They couldn't spare the bosses, could they? My favorite part of this here game, yeah, they got worse too. Instead of continuing to be general skill checks like bosses should be, they became damage checks like the Forge Master, alienating any build relying on attrition, and further solidifying how miserable playing melee had become. Patience checks like the Bog Witch, this one just sucks. I get that she's a witch and she should fly around on a broomstick, but this waffle started growing mold waiting for her to have her fun. Dodge checks like the Viper, whom I consider spoilers so I won't show, but imagine as many AoEs as you possibly can. Then imagine the arena is the size of a chode. Then imagine that you take damage if you touch the walls. Then imagine that the boss endlessly alternates between those AoEs and a cute little thing where the walls throw spears at you in an asymmetrical manner and they poison you as well. Then imagine that the boss shits poison that makes it more difficult to dodge everything else. And then imagine that when you're done dodging everything else, the boss has already queued up another attack before you've even had the opportunity to finish your dodge roll. And then imagine that it exists in a real game on a real, meaning non-imaginary version of planet Earth. Endurance checks like the final boss of Act 3, also a spoiler obviously, a decent boss despite all that has plagued the game thus far, but with far too much health. To anchor this in not quite objectivity, but to give it a tad more credibility, these are the thoughts of two players with differing builds and playstyles. There's a shared experience here. And apart from any warrior-specific complaints, we both felt the same. Path of Exile 2 is a game stricken by two warring philosophies. It wants to be slower paced, methodical, far removed from all that turns me myself away from the genre, but old habits seem to die pretty damn hard in this case. It's difficult to give a proper verdict for two reasons. For one, I haven't played all of what's available and it's outwardly a work in progress. For two, I'm completely split. Like their focus seems to be. If I'd stopped before Act 3, I'd recommend this game in a second, but now I'm a little worried for its future, and I'd plead you to steer clear of that third act, if that's all that was on offer. Look, I think grinding gear games has two paths. They can't cut straight down the middle, believe me, that's what they're doing right now, and it's more of a mess than any other option. The first path leads back to those old tried and true habits. They let the game become the expectation. They'll still have an audience for that, and it won't be a bad game by any stretch of the imagination. The second guides them towards realignment. They'd refocus and deliver on the promise of a more thoughtful ARPG, methodical, more of what primed them to become one of the best ARPGs available. So, in lieu of a verdict, I'll say this. If you're on the fence, wait and see if they trend towards that second path. If they do, I'll be right there with you, perhaps even for the end game. But if they don't, and you're not married to the genre, I'd find something else to sink your time into. It's a waiting game now. Hey, if you're still with me, I'm James. If you happen to enjoy the video, please consider dropping a sub. I promise I am in it for the long run. Thanks!